So Agile really focuses on more of a project, customer, team level iteration. You need to have new practices for iterative. This is really important. I have to stress. I need to stress this because I see teams that can actually adopt iterative development really quickly, but they don't have the maturity in their engineering practices, so they introduce a lot of risk. So who's going to pay attention to the technical integrity across the enterprise? That's a critical issue that has to happen. And who owns it if it doesn't work? The business. They pay for everything. So they own all these issues. Now hopefully they got a good owner, they have a good partner in technology. So business needs to learn how to prioritize by highest business value. That means that we need to have clear business value criteria. They want to incrementally deliver that to the development team. Work on this next. And have a portfolio or a backlog of those increments, and they continually plan it. Development organizations should focus on speed. Now this is really important. Now here I am saying speed. What is the minimum I can do responsibly? Remember that word, responsibly, to achieve the increment. You know, a lot of technology guys believe it's valuable to put every entry point and exit point into this design, the functionality they get. But what do? They delay when I get the feature. And it never gets used anyway. Right, so responsibly, meaning don't do it myopically, so I can't extend it in the future, but don't overbuild it either. Don't over-architect, don't over-analyze, don't overbuild. So there's a balance they have to pay attention to. I mean, make sure you can extend it and continue to extend it in the future. Now, management has to look at what are all the things getting in the way. In this client I was talking about, management, the first year I spent going and removing all the things that they just spent 6 years putting in this 2,000-step process that they had. But we didn't need all of those things anymore. In iterative development, man, we kept running into those every day almost. So management needs to run interference. They need to stay focused on, do I have a steady cadence and flow of that increment or that chunk of value that we're doing. So these boundaries are pretty important. You know, teams don't get to go run off and do whatever they want. They have to do whatever they can to achieve the increment of value within the boundaries of the organization. So who can determine what's the value? Only the business. We don't want IT thinking of what's value because they don't do it well. Okay,
the business don't do it well.
No. Well, that's probably. I think that's kind of true. I think if I ask them what's the value proposition of the portfolio for the whole year, I'll get a fuzzy answer. If I narrow it down to what's your highest value, I think they can tell me. Like if I ask them what their criteria is, I think they can tell me that too. You know, one thing I've noticed is when we shift out of this mentality and go from this traditional waterfall approach to an iterative development approach, we don't understand all the shifts that happen. You know, if you look at a portfolio on an annual basis and say, here's what the annual plan is for next year, they start prioritizing the projects based on highest value, which means they have criteria. They don't replan, which is the problem. If I iteratively am going to work on things, then I should be iteratively replanning and saying, is this the next highest increment? This aspect of doing it once and then following the plan as opposed to doing it once and then every quarter replanning is where we want to take advantage of that. So we have a practice typically. What I see is there's a practice to doing this. They just only do it once. It's kind of like we estimate once and we don't go back and re-estimate all the time. So only the business. Why is this of value? Now this is where the partnership is. Here's the value proposition that I'm looking for, that I'm willing to fund. What's the best way to deliver it? So this is where we have technology, technical owners, delivery managers should be involved. And then within these boundaries, this is the team should be able to just go do it. Here's a chunk. Here's the highest priority chunk. Go and do it. So having these boundaries are really clear. They can't say, well, I don't like doing it this way because that's a boundary for integrity. If you have a requirements baseline, or if you have a system test baseline, team can't say, I don't want to feed it anymore, I'm going to do it a different way. Right? So there's those boundaries that have to be maintained. Does that make sense? Okay. Incremental versus iterative. Now one of the biggest things, I'm going to show you a little exercise about system evolution. System evolution versus business evolution. You guys know the difference between those two? Increment is the business chunk. Iterative is how I evolve right, business chunk. But one of the biggest things, so business evolution system, I'm show you a little exercise about that, because I see that this gets implemented incorrectly quite a bit, in which case you can't take advantage of the iterative development. There's a project I was working on. It was a program, and it was straight through processing. There was transactions that were exceptioning out of the system, and so they'd have these manual process associates having to resolve them. And so the whole goal was invest some dollars, automate some of those manual processes so that we could reduce the headcount. And it was a system that was not scaling. If we have one more exception, we're going to run out of capacity and we'll have a real problem. And so straight through processing is what they're looking for. And so I asked them to prioritize this program by chunks. Give me chunks that you can prioritize. So they did it based on volume of transactions. They gave me some chunks. So I asked them what the timeline looked like. They said, well, we have to do this thing called plan setup. We have to do this workflow changes. We have this enterprise data that we got to create. That's a big ugly word, right? Because enterprise, it takes months to discover what's going on. And then they had to automate this straight through processing transaction. They said 9 months. So this was the plan they laid out. So when they implement plan setup, which they can build in a month, what do I get? Nothing. So I'm like, I don't like this roadmap. It's going to work for me. So I asked them this way: plan setup, workflow, data. I said, what does this chunk look like? He said, well, what do you mean? You can't do that. I said, well, what does that chunk look like? All these transactions in this grouping the same. They said, no. 80% of them were these 10 transactions. I said, well, let's build that. Now, the IT folks didn't like this option. They said, no, we can't do that. I said, why? He said, because if there's enterprise data, we could have a whole bunch of rework. We build that, and then we then go back and try and build the other ones. Now, what's the wrong with that picture? This is why IT doesn't get to pick what's valuable. Right? Because I said, well, you know, how long will it take to build the 80%? They said 6 months. I said, okay, so now I'm really interested in this. I want this. 3 months sooner, I get my return. 3 months sooner, you just build this. I want that. So what's the problem? They said, well, it could be rework. I said, how much rework? And I looked at these transactions. The other 10% were alternate types, and another 10% was exceptions. I said, how much rework? If I build this, release it, and then go back and have these built. They said, maybe up to a month. So it would be 4 months instead of the 3. This is a business decision. So for a potential 1 month of rework, they were not going to allow me to realize my business value 3 months sooner. This is business evolution. This is how we want to drive. In this case, I can choose not to do this iteration. In this case, I have no choice but to do them all because I don't realize it until the very end. Now, incidentally, we released this in 6 months. We exceeded our plan return by an order of magnitude, and the business never even built these. They said, we don't even care about those. We can buy so many bodies for the savings we got, we don't care about it. Now, what would we have done? We would have added this. This is definitely, you know, flattening out on my business value curve. Can you guys see that? Yeah. Right? So business evolution allows me to cut things off. System evolution, it doesn't matter. I can think I'm prioritizing this way, but if the system is still being built this way, I still have to do all the iterations in order to receive the value, in which case my curve ends up looking like this anyway. You guys follow that? Yeah. This is really, really important for the business to understand, because IT will always give them this, because this is optimized. This is how they think. Build this chunk, build this chunk, build this chunk, and then they integrate it all together, and then you get your stuff. So